Welcome back to another lesson of Beyond the Basics of block printing. So what we're going to talk about today is multiple block printing. And what that means is kind of exactly what it sounds like. So we're going to use multiple blocks to create one final print. Now, of course, we're going to hopefully have a whole edition of that final print. But as far as starting out, you would do your drawing just like you would normally. So you have your blocks. And all the blocks have to be cut to the same exact size, okay? So I do my drawing, and what I do is transfer it onto each block using the same drawing, and that way I know what to carve out for each color, and I'll explain that in a second. But what I wanted to stress on some of these is you'll just use the same drawing, or you can go a little bit more fluid and just play with kind of textures, and you'll see a little bit more about that in a second. So with any of these, you need to have a registration system, and it can be something super simple. For this purpose, all I did is took a piece of cardboard. The outside of the cardboard is the size of the paper. The inside of the cardboard is the block. So all the blocks fit in to this cardboard little registration jig, okay? Now, I've carved each of my blocks to a certain point. You always want to start with a lighter color. So the first color I did for this snail was just the blue. I printed the blue, and then on the middle block, I carved out some more. We will talk about this a lot more in the live session, but I wanted the sky to remain just the blue and the color of the paper. So for the second block, I completely carved out the sky, so none of it would print. And I just carved a few lines into the snail's shell because I want those to stay blue. Then I printed this. I put it in my registration jig. I laid my paper down and I pulled the print, and that's where I got that purple. Now, I didn't have an example for you of stopping at the purple, but the purple, and then on top of it, I took the last block, inked it up in black, put it down, hit it down, and got the black. And you're gonna see this happen live in just a second. The other one is a little less precise. It didn't have to line up so perfectly. And that was just a tree with a sky background and some grass. So the first thing I did was printed the background, which is the sun, okay? I printed that in the lightest color. I tried it in yellow, and I tried it in orange. Then I took that one out, printed the green grass, took that one out, and then printed the tree in black. So you can see you have a few different options with the same blocks. You could leave out the grass or any combination. The last one, which is a little bit more freeing, and it's a little bit more just learning how to layer, is I just made a texture, just like a water texture. And then I just carved some fish. Now the thing about this one, because the fish don't have like a squared off background, they're a little bit easier because you don't, even though you want to register them, you want them to line up pretty good, it doesn't have to be perfect. But this is where you can really learn how to layer colors on top of each other. So you could really do textures upon textures upon textures and just see what happens. See how the colors play off of each other. So a registration jig, talk just a tiny bit more about that. Couple ways people do it. Now, there are more elaborate registration systems. I am teaching you an absolute basic type of registration system, just so you can kind of get your feet wet and learn this process. One was, like I said, cutting the piece of cardboard. Outside is always the dimension of the paper, inside the dimension of the block. When you are using a registration jig like this, it's somewhat helpful to put some packing tape over the top. That way you can actually leave your block in and ink it up in the registration jig, because if you get some ink on there with the packing tape, you can just wipe it off real quick. So that's one way. Another way is to have a piece of thick Mylar, or this is one of those cutting boards, and you basically make a corner for where your block goes and a corner for where your paper goes. Again, super simple, but it does the job. So just to show you, since we have a few of these left, let's do the final snail on him, and then we'll do some fish. Now, in this case, I'm not doing the middle block. I'm just gonna do the final black layer. So this one will just be blue and black with the white paper, where this one had that middle block. So I'm gonna take my third block, gonna lay it in my registration jig. Here's something that's very important. We're not perfect, we're not this perfect machine cut. So it might be a little bit off one way or the other. So what you should always do is pick a corner that you definitely butt your stuff up to. So for me, I use this bottom left corner, and I always make sure my block is all the way to that corner. And the same thing for the paper. When I ink it up and put the paper down, I'm really gonna focus on this, getting this, this vertical, this horizontal, perfect in that corner. So let's just get a little ink. See it in action. I want to say something that's super, super important. Your first layer of color, make way more than you're going to want, because you're going to mess up on the registration. So say I'm hoping to get 10 final pieces. I might actually start with 20 of that first layer. Gives me some room for if my registration doesn't come out like I had hoped. So I'm going to just ink this up just like I would, and I'm being careful, but like I said, I have got packing tape on this, so even if I were to get some on the registration jig, I could wipe it off. So I've got my first color, and I'm going to go do this one. This is all the way down in that left corner, and this is going to be now matched up in this corner. And I've got my Baron, holding it down, and I'm rubbing the back. And there you go. So because I used the registration jig, I was able to do the black color so it lined up really well on the snail. And there's that one. Put that to the side just to show you. This is the first layer I did. Again, I just did some water. And so I'm just going to ink up the fish in black. What's really nice too is if when you're working on some of these, you kind of stick to one size. So like if your block is like, these are 3x5 blocks, and then the paper is 5x7. So I did a few in this same size. That way I can use the same registration jig. And that way you can kind of spend more time kind of learning and experimenting, because that's how we just get better, is just doing. The more of these you make, the better you will be at doing them. So I've got my fish inked up. I'm going to push that all the way to this bottom corner. I'm going to take my paper, and I'm going to, sorry, I had to flip it, forgot which way I was going, lay it down in this bottom corner. Using my Baron. And there you have the fish. So there's, you can see if you use a colored ink, you're going to get a little bit of transparency between it. So that's going to, be a little bit more of the layering. The black does tend to become a little bit more opaque, so you're not seeing all the layers underneath. But I certainly could have carved a different texture and layered another blue or a blue-green above this to try to make more layers in the sea, or made a carving that looked like kelp or seaweed coming up from the bottom. So that's the basics of it. Registration systems, basic ones, either using with cardboard, or we can just use tape, but we'll talk about this more in the live session too.